Well, welcome to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. You're listening to newsstreamingnetwork.com, home of Going Bold and Going Solo, which is exactly what we're doing tonight. Unfortunately, our guest isn't here tonight, but we're going to roll with it. This is the Going Solo with Cece, and I am Cece Shatz, the doyenne of relationship building, and I'm so pleased to be with you here tonight. We were going to talk about cybersecurity with a wonderful guest that I have, but unfortunately, Jonathan Steele. Sometimes our wires get crossed a little bit when we have a time difference, and so that might be very well what it is. So we're going to go with it. I pulled up an article about cybersecurity with regards to dating. Those of you that would like to read the article, it's really good. It is on datingapps.com, and it's a blog about cybersecurity. So let's talk about it. I'm going to go through some of the items here. It starts out with saying understand your risk. I think we all know there's risk involved when we're online of any sort, right? There's a risk involved especially when we're online dating. A lot of times, we get our emotional, stuff like that all wonky, and we don't always think before we do things. And so sometimes I think when we're talking about on a dating site, we do need to think a little bit. Oh, wait a minute, I think he's here with me here tonight. Hold on just one moment. Jonathan.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, it's really nice to have you. Everyone, this is Jonathan Steele. He's a seasoned family law attorney from Beermann LLP, and I'm just really pleased. I was going to just talk about dating sites on, when it comes to cybersecurity. I pulled up a great article and I shared it with the audience, but let's switch gears a little bit because you're here, and I am just so thrilled to have you here with us. Now, you have been in the business for quite some time, so we're going to talk about, the critical topic of cybersecurity and its importance in the digital age, especially for those of, individuals that are online and possibly, in the middle of divorcing, the digital aspect of it. So welcome so much to the show. I am just really thrilled to have you here with us tonight.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
It's wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about it. Now, you're a family law attorney, so you've been doing this for quite some time, helping those get through the muckety muck of divorce, right? So let's talk a little bit and switch gears when it comes to that. And let's talk a little bit about the cybersecurity. So can you share with us why you decided and how you decided to get into this type of field?
Sure. Cybersecurity and privacy has always interested me as far back as I can remember. I've always been kind of a privacy geek. I've been on Signal and Proton Mail for about 10 years now. And so cybersecurity sort of dovetailed into that for me. It really sparked more of an interest in it when COVID hit and lawyers had little to do while the courts were trying to catch up and move on to Zoom. So I went down a deep rabbit hole that I have still not found the bottom of, learning about cybersecurity, researching, reading, getting certifications. So it snowballed.
Yeah, I tell you what, there's so much to it. And as we progress in the technology stage, we're going to continue to find more and more with that. And so one of the aspects of, the security itself. And so, we have there's a lot of areas we can go into, especially those that are going through a divorce, and those now that are in the dating world. But let's talk a little bit like when you're starting to divorce, right? And you have a digital presence. Let's talk a little bit about that because sometimes there's some aspects to that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I refer to it as your footprint. So you probably have social media. If you're like the majority of the world, you probably have an Instagram page. You probably have Facebook. Maybe you're still on X, or what was formerly Twitter, and you probably overshare. You're probably putting out more information than you should be, whether you know exactly what is out there and who's seeing it. It's out there. And once you're putting those pictures out there, you're never getting them back. Sometimes the pictures that you're putting out there have metadata attached to them that show when the photos were taken, where they were taken. And it gives somebody the ability to kind of have a picture of your life about where you are, what you're doing, when you're doing it, who you're with. And if you're not really keeping track of who's following your pages, whether they're private pages, whether the followers are connected to your spouse, it can become kind of a treasure trove of information that can be used against you in your divorce case.
Absolutely. And many people don't think that can be used against you in your divorce, and it certainly can, can't it?
It's very often used against you, whether it's an order of protection case, whether it's a divorce case. When parents are fighting over custody or parenting time, a lot of times you'll see evidence come out about, well, it was your parenting time, and look, you were at a bar, as evidenced by your Instagram photos, or you said you are not dating anyone. Well, look at this photo from Facebook that shows you on vacation with someone else. So maybe you might lose your right to maintenance or alimony because you've entered into a new living and dating relationship. So it absolutely comes into play.
Yeah, it certainly does. And we never thought it did previously, but now we're seeing more and more that it certainly is. And then you also have to worry about altercations with that, people doing different things with your documentation, maybe taking some of the pictures and doing other things with the pictures, adding things to them that weren't there. So, there's a lot of things you have to think about when you're going through divorce, and think about your security. Is that correct?
While you were talking there, you mentioned something that I have not seen happen, but is a real concern. And it's that maybe your spouse has access to your Instagram page, and maybe they start putting pictures on your Instagram to set you up, to make it look like you were at a bar, to make it look like you were doing something you weren't. And so, if you don't have your privacy settings or your security settings tightened to the point where you can keep your spouse out of your account, you're sort of waiting for that to happen. So that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's something to keep in mind. So I guess that's probably one of our tips is like, let's lock down our passwords. Let's go in and change all your passwords to everything, making sure that nothing is going to be accessible to anyone else but yourself. And then of course, posting things you want to, I always say right away, my divorce support group, get off their Facebook page, unfriend them. Not that you're trying to be mean or anything, but if you guys are getting a divorce, you're now going to be separated. So there's no reason that you should see their things nor they see your things. So you want to unfriend and start creating that division. But the reality is you really need to not post anything you don't want anybody to see, right?
Yeah. I mean, I tell clients sometimes, while the case is pending, just get off social media. Mm-hmm. And you would think that I was asking them for a limb, because nowadays it's like it's an integral part of your life. Instagram and the endless scrolling that comes with it. But if you have 1,000 followers, you may unfollow or you may unfriend your spouse, but you may forget that someone is like a mutual friend and they're feeding your information to your spouse. So unless you really have a good grasp on who all of your followers are, you may inadvertently be sharing information with your spouse.
Absolutely. I've had friends actually contact me and ask me, can I unfriend such and such, because they're actually going through me to be able to see what they're doing. So either I unfriend them, or I'll say, okay, I'll unfriend both of you. So then that way, we'll still be friends, but I'm going to unfriend both of you. So that way it's like equal, that kind of thing. And so I have had that happen where you've been able to go in through somebody else's, or somebody else is spying on you and relaying information, which you don't necessarily want. Let's talk about the security part of it, because, we have a lot of individuals that, worry about stalking and, various things like that. So what would you say with regards to that?
The metadata there is a concern also. I think Instagram now does a better job of scrubbing metadata before images get posted. But you want to be careful about where you're posting your photos. It's always safer to, if you're on vacation, maybe wait until you get back home before you upload a big batch of photos to Facebook. It doesn't need to be live. All of your followers can wait a week or two before they see all the fun photos that you took at the pool. It's a security problem if you're posting live. If somebody's following you and they see you're posting from the beach in Mexico, well, then they know your house is unattended. And any information that you're giving to someone that has an interest in your whereabouts, you're helping them to stalk. And so if you can cut that off, if you can misdirect them by posting after the fact, you're doing yourself a service there.
Yeah, I think that's important to all of us. We should take heed on that, because if we're posting when we're away, someone knows we're not at home and they could easily break into your house or do whatever. So you want to definitely, you want to be, really wary of things like that happening. Now let's talk a little bit about cell phones, because cell phones can also be, we can be traced. They can put things in our cell phone that we can be traced and tracked and stuff like that. So what would you say with regards to that?
There's a couple things. One, if you have an iPhone, which a lot of people nowadays have, there's a feature in your settings that's called Safety Check. And it's made for domestic violence victims. It's made for an abusive kind of relationship. And it just, in an Apple-friendly way, it walks you through the process of seeing what permissions you've given and to who, and allows you to real easily and really quickly revoke permissions that you don't want to exist anymore. You can see who you've shared photos with, who you've shared location access with, what apps you've shared your microphone with, your speaker, your dictation. It walks you through it in a really easy to digest way so that you can figure out, do I somehow still have ties to my spouse or a boyfriend or someone that I no longer want to have access to all of these things? And then, if you want to get more into the nitty gritty, you can go into your privacy settings and look just app by app what you've given access to for your location settings. And those are important. There's frequent locations on your device that it can tell you where you spend a lot of time. You may have just sort of clicked through and said yes, yes, yes when you were downloading apps because it was the quick solution, but maybe your app for your grill doesn't need to know your location. Maybe apps for Candy Crush or Angry Bird, maybe they don't need microphone access. You can sort of curtail really what needs to have access to what, and it makes sense to take the time to go through and do that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I will share with the audience is that I, had broken up with someone and didn't realize it, but I was wondering why the person always knew where I was and had put something on my phone, had done something to my phone that I didn't realize. And so when I went to go in there someone said, you better go in and look in your settings and look at your stuff. And sure enough, I found that I was being tracked. So you don't know what that other person is maybe capable of doing in a time of maybe getting angry at you or whatever. So, it was kind of stupid because I never did anything, was any interest to it. But it was still an invasion to my privacy. So so definitely you want to make sure you do those things. Is there anything else you can think of that we need to probably think about when we're thinking about security?
I think it's important, all the steps that you take for yourself, to take them for your kids also. Kids they're vulnerable, right? So if you have an 8-year-old that you trust with a cell phone, you need to look at their privacy settings. You need to look at their security settings and see, have they inadvertently shared their location access? Are they posting things that have their location? And be cautious about what you're posting to social media as it relates to your kids. I see a lot of high profile divorces where the children could be ransom targets. And so protecting them is vital. And so if you are taking the steps to protect your own devices, it's as important, if not more so, to make sure your kids' devices are protected and put some parental controls around them so that they can't unprotect themselves knowingly or unknowingly.
So what do you say when you're getting a divorce and your kids, your kids have the phone, right? And so if they're being tracked by one parent versus the other parent, or what do you do about that? How do you come to some sort of meeting of the minds on that?
It's tough. When you talked earlier about mutual friends sharing information through social media, I've seen cases where the child will be feeding information from mom's social media to dad or vice versa. And your kids are the last people that you're going to think about. I need to unfriend my child so that they're not, leaking my information to my opponent in my divorce case.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tricky thing with kids. There's not a real good answer to it. You do the best you can with them. Sometimes when you're ironing out a divorce decree, you can try to spell out certain provisions and things where you say that you can't have location sharing when you're with the other parent. Maybe you have 2 different phones or 2 different devices for different households. And then you just try to monitor it as best you can. If it may feel like you're invading the privacy of your child by monitoring and seeing what they're doing on their devices, but you probably have an obligation as their parent to do that. So just
Right.
keeping tabs on it is important.
Yeah, it's a real tricky thing because it's hard when one parent has moved on, one partner has moved on, the other partner is kind of left behind trying to figure out how to get through life, how to get through this step of being separated. And so that's hard enough than to find out, that the other party is going full speed ahead, in a new relationship and a new life and a new everything, and you're back here trying to still, get your balance on everything. And so, this is social media and everything really does play a lot into that because it really does hurt the parties. So it's great. So I love social media. I'm all over it. So I love it, but it can also be painful to those, that are healing and trying to move on. And we know that the other party is going to be moving on when we're getting a divorce. We know that it still hurts us. And so we want to be mindful of that for certain. But security is a big question here. And so what else can we think about? Like we talked about cell phones, we talked about social media. Anything else that comes to mind that we need to think about security?
Any devices that have access to the internet. Sometimes people don't think about what are called IoT devices or Internet of Things devices. You consider my thermostat a smart device, or your Roomba is a smart device because it's on the internet, or you name it. Just about everything nowadays connects to the internet. My toothbrush connects to my cell phone when it's in Bluetooth range. And every one of those devices that has access to the internet is a potential vulnerability. If it's always on the internet and it's sharing a Wi-Fi with your computer and sharing a Wi-Fi with your cell phone, and it's not patched and kept up to date, it's a vulnerability. So you have to really be mindful of all of the different devices that you're buying, whether they're from Amazon or wherever, and what you're giving them access to, and whether they're sharing a Wi-Fi network with your other devices. One way of trying to isolate that is a lot of Wi-Fi systems give you the ability to set up a guest network. So if you have guests staying at your home, you can give them a separate network on the same Wi-Fi router. Mm-hmm. And you can use that guest network for your Nest thermostat and for your Roomba and your mm-hmm. toothbrush and your refrigerator and things that are a little bit vulnerable, and have a separate network specifically for your cell phone and your computer and devices that are a little bit more important and that you trust a little bit more.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. It's crazy. I mean, I worry a lot about cameras because, I'm in the, doing this recording and stuff like that. So I have various different cameras, right? And so then I'm thinking, sometimes when I'm in the room and I'm not doing something, I'm not on air, I always wonder, oh, can someone tap into that camera? So that kind of freaks me out a little bit to think about those kind of things. So what would you say with regards to like cameras and stuff?
Anytime you've seen Mark Zuckerberg or people that are in the know on TV and that you see their computers in the background, they have a piece of tape over their camera. They have a sticky note over it. They have some sort of thing that's blocking their camera, and it's probably for a good reason. Macs are pretty good about it. There's usually a little green light by the camera that gives you notice if the camera's active. But not all computers are like that, and it's hard to just blindly trust that. It's much easier to trust a piece of tape, to trust a Post-it note, to unplug your camera when you're not using it, to use a manual shutter that opens and closes. So you have some peace of mind that there's a physical barrier between you and the camera. But it's certainly a big concern, cameras. And if you travel and you're staying in an Airbnb, that's a hot topic right now. They recently banned interior cameras in Airbnbs, but whether or not everybody's abiding by that remains to be seen.
Yeah,
So
yeah. That to me that would be very scary to stay in a place and then think they filmed you while you're in there and you have no idea that they've done that because some of these cameras are so small you don't even know they're there. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. So yeah, I keep something over my camera, so I will tell you that because I am a little paranoid about it. But on the other thing is let's because we have those baby monitors, right? Those baby, you hear about that all the time with the baby monitor. Somebody hacking into a baby monitor. So how would you protect a baby monitor?
that's one of the scariest hacks that I've heard about. Maybe it's just because I've got small kids and I've got
Mhm.
cameras in their rooms. But when I read those stories, it's alarming because it's not even just somebody watching. You always hear they end up talking to the child through the camera, and it's like bone chilling. It's very scary. Um, and there's some things you can do to make that safer. But I come back to something my pediatrician told me when we had our firstborn, which was unless you're living in like a 10,000 square foot home, you're going to hear your child when they cry in the middle of the night. Do you really need that camera? When you were growing up, did you have a camera when you were a baby? And the answer is no, that wasn't a thing. I mean, there were like the audio monitors, but were those even necessary? Maybe not. But for the parents that want the cameras, and I'm one of them, you want that peace of mind and knowing my child's still breathing, they're okay in their cribs. You do the best you can. You buy a camera from a reputable company, from a company that hasn't had public data breaches, and you use unique passwords. You use two-factor authentication for the accounts. To the extent it's possible, you keep it local only and not connected to the internet. And some cameras, companies are better than others. I would recommend the company Nanit, Nanit, I think does a good job with security. It offers two-factor authentication. It has the ability to be local only. But it's one of those things where you can only be reasonably secure. You can't be 100%, and you do the best you can.
Yeah, maybe just use it when you need to use it. If you feel like a really need. I mean, because some children, they've had health concerns or whatever, and so it does give you that sense of security to be able to hear them and see them. So yeah, so I totally understand that. So when we're talking about this, what you bring up is passwords, right? So how often should we change our passwords?
That has changed over time. It used to be recommended to regularly change your password. Nowadays, it's not necessarily considered best practice to do that for a variety of different reasons, password fatigue. And if you had a good one to begin with, why do you need to change it? I think it's more important that you have a unique password for every account and that it's randomly generated. So get a password manager. There's dozens of them out there. There's a lot of good ones that are reputable and trustworthy. Let those generate your passwords, because they're going to be able to do a much better job than what you can think of, no matter how many creative at symbols or exclamation points you put in your animal's name. It's just not random. And so, passphrases are good sometimes. They're easier to remember as opposed to a password. It's just a series of words strung together, maybe with some characters in there. But you don't necessarily need to change them that often. It's more important to have a unique password for each account, so that if one account is breached, it's not just a global vulnerable attack surface where all your accounts are breached.
Right. It drives me nuts, the passwords, right? And then, Google and everything, it's like it doesn't, you have to change this, and then you got to change everything, and it just drives you absolutely mad. But it's the world we live in. But what about this face recognition, right? I have a couple things where I did the face recognition. Now I go and do it, and they say they don't recognize my face. And it's like, what? I mean, I'm the only person with this face. So so what do you say about that?
I think it's a trade-off of convenience for security. I have a 20-something character password on my phone. And so to type that in 100 times a day would be wildly inconvenient. So I accept a little bit of a trade-off for my face to be scanned. And Apple does a good job with Face ID. It's pretty good about being able to recognize, are you actually looking at the camera? So somebody's not just using, your face when you're sleeping, or using true depth so that they can't just use a photo of your face. But to your point, there are times when it doesn't recognize me, whether I'm wearing, during COVID, when I was wearing a mask, sometimes it struggled. If I wear certain sunglasses that have a dark tint, it struggles. I live in Chicago where the winters are freezing. And so sometimes I have to wear a hat or like a mask or, whatever, and it struggles. And it's a trade-off, but it's certainly easier than typing in a long password.
Yeah, I just must look very different without makeup. So I don't know, but it's like, oh no, it doesn't know who I am now. But yeah, that was pretty crazy. So let's talk a little bit about, because I want to make sure that we talk about this, because those that are getting divorced, let's talk a little bit about like your digital information, your digital stuff, right? Like when we're getting divorced, like domain names and various different things like that. How do you start separating those kind of things? Like, because there are assets. When you've got a domain name, it could be worth some money, those kind of things. How do you guys talk about that when you're talking about your digital information?
I have not personally seen a domain name allocated in a divorce, but I think it's an asset like anything else. If there's some goodwill associated with the domain name and it's attributable to a business, I don't see why it wouldn't be allocated like any other asset. But there are certainly other digital assets that get allocated. A lot of times you might have digital photo albums that you both want to keep copies of. And so I've seen people fight about, I want the family albums or I want copies of them. And if they're in the possession of one spouse or the other, sometimes you have to fight with them to get access to them. Mm-hmm. And so, there are certainly digital rights that come with photos or, messages or things that you want to retain as a result of your divorce. But a domain name is no different. I think that certainly if you've built up a business, it's hard to just switch to a new domain name and start from scratch. So that would be an asset like anything else.
Right. Yeah, I know some individuals buy a bunch of domain names that they think are, hot, and that somebody's going to want them, and then they can turn around and sell them. So they sit on them for a little bit, and then they turn around and try to sell them. So so there is some value in those type of things. So I guess if you're getting a divorce, if you purchase those together, then it would be something that you would need to divide up. So that's very interesting. So anything that we haven't talked about tonight that we need to talk about? Because I will tell you, this is out of my realm. I mean, cybersecurity and all of that. I know I'm probably doing everything wrong, Jonathan. So is there anything else that you might suggest for us?
You do little things that go a long way. You do a lot of the little things seem like they're going to cause a lot of friction. I don't want to have a longer password. I don't want to use two-factor authentication. It's annoying to me, but you have to think about the gains that come with them, and they're oftentimes worth the trade-off. The risk of trying to repair after the fact is way outweighs the convenience factor of having to type in an extra password or having to wait for the text message to your phone to get a two-factor authentication code. If you wait until after the fact, if you wait until your account is breached or you're hacked, it's too late. Once your information is out there, once your social security number gets leaked or your personal data is out there, it's too late. You can never get it back. And so, the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of a cure, is very applicable to cybersecurity. So, and you don't need to, it's not a light switch. You don't need to one day just be completely secure and completely private. It's a gradient. So you do the best you can, you improve a little bit over time, and you keep making improvements, and it ends up being worth it. So it's worth the trade-off.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, I know that a lot of our listeners are going into the dating arena, right? And they're doing like online dating. And I know there's various different tips that you can, give with regards to their security. One I've always said is if you're on a dating site, let that dating site protect you. Stay on the site. A lot of scammers will want to get you off the site as quickly as possible, right? Because they want to scam you. And so you want to keep your personal information, held tight and not give out that. Another thing I've often said is don't give out your phone number. Use a Google phone number. Get a phone number and through Google, and you can use that. So you've got that as a way of a little bit of protection, and you also have a copy of everything. So if they call you or whatever, you have you have that registered on your email. So that's a good thing. Any other ideas and suggestions, like with regards to like dating?
Yeah, there's a couple apps that I think it's worth looking into. There's one called Cloaked, and there's one called MySudo. They do a similar feature set, and to demonstrate what they do, MySudo, for instance, you can create a pseudo identity. You can create an email address and a phone number and a name, and it's all associated with one compartmentalized person. And so you can interact with somebody that you've met on a dating site. They can have that email address. They can have that phone number. And then if things go south and they're sending you too many messages, you don't like them anymore, you don't want to talk to them, you can just burn that pseudo identity, start from scratch, and then they don't have your contact information anymore. They don't have a real contact for you to begin with. And so starting over is very easy. It's much, it's not that dissimilar from Google Voice, but it's more compartmentalized in that you have a phone number, you have an email, you can have credit card numbers associated with your pseudo identity. And Cloaked does something similar. It gives you the option of more phone numbers than MySudo. MySudo on the high end, I think you can have 9 different phone numbers, emails. And Cloaked ostensibly is an unlimited pool of phone numbers, which is an interesting concept. You can have a different phone number for every service and app you sign up for. So I would use one of those if I was going into the dating scene.
Yeah, that's a little scary because even those that want to scam you can use that. You know what I mean? And so it's like, wow, yeah. So that's a little bit scary. But there's nothing wrong with trying to protect yourself. And I think that those out there, if you say this is what I'm doing, they have to respect that or move on. It's one of those things. But I know that for me, once I'm into, starting to talk with them and possibly a relationship for them, I do, a check on them, background check. And so what would you say with regards to a background check?
Be cautious. It's easy. It's easy to do a background check. You can go on, pay $2 and get somebody's criminal history. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. Some of the background check services are dicey. So I would use something that's reputable, and try to avoid an overreaching background check where you're going a little bit above and beyond what information you need to see if you're safe. But I think if you're talking about your personal safety, take all the precautions that you can. And can some of the evildoers use the same tools you're using to protect yourself? Of course. Like any tool, it has good uses and bad uses. It's just a matter of who's using them. So could my pseudo or cloaked be used for a nefarious purpose? You bet.
Yeah, which is a shame, but yeah. Well, I know, like, I do the background check, and I always tell them straight up, I'm going to do a background check. So, I always ask, have you been arrested or anything like that I need to know of? Anything you need to tell me, and there was only one person that I found out that had been arrested and just out of jail from scamming women. So I did a background check, but I did the background check, and actually it happened because we couldn't find anything on him. And he said he was working with Homeland Security, and he gave me his website, looked really flashy. And then my girlfriend said, something's not feeling right. If he was that high up or whatever, you'd be seeing something about him on Facebook or, some of the social media, and we saw nothing. And so she was pretty good, and she did the background and she found it. So yeah. So, I mean, it's terrible that we have to do this in today's world, but let's face it, we have to do it sometimes. And if your gut is telling you something's not right, something is probably not right.
I agree. I think trusting your intuition is important. If you're on a dating app and somebody's trying to immediately get you off the dating app and start communicating with you elsewhere, and all of a sudden they start pushing you towards like cryptocurrency or something, it feels off. It probably is off. So you have to trust your gut. So your friend was right in telling you something was off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she was a blessing. So yeah, I mean, anything else we can think of? I'm trying to think of any different. I know we're going to think of other things when we're off the air here, but it is so nice having you on to talk about some of these things, because it's not something we really think about. We don't think about being scammed. Are there any particular scams out there that comes to mind that, are like new that we haven't heard about?
You've probably heard about them. It's just more of the same, and they're increasing in frequency. The one thing that I would recommend to any of your listeners or viewers would be there's a website called Join Delete Me by Beermann. It does a good job of removing your personal information from data broker websites. And those are the websites that buy and sell your personal information. So if you Google your name and you see your home address and your phone number and your email and your relatives and people you've been married to, it's because of data brokers. And you can manually remove that stuff. You can submit deletion requests, but it's very time consuming to do it the manual way. You can spend, I don't know, on the high end, a couple $100 a year to have Delete Me do it for you, and they will continue to do it every quarter. So that's one of the problems with doing it yourself, is it's like a game of whack-a-mole. You might delete it, and then that same data broker might buy your data again a month later and repost it. And so that poses a danger to your physical safety if it's that easy to just Google your name and address. But it also poses a danger to your cyber security, because you're an easier target if somebody can call you on the phone and say something that's relatable to you. They can say you're a friend's name, or they can say, they know your area code. They can make it look like they're calling from your area code. They might be able to say something, I did an appraisal on your house and here's what it came back at your address. And anytime that you're on the phone with somebody or you're getting text from somebody and they know something about you, it gives that sort of trust factor where your guards let down a little bit. So there's a multitude of benefits to having all of that information removed from the internet. It's something that I value a lot. In divorce law, you make a lot of enemies. Not everybody loves you, and so if I'm got my wife and kids at home, it's important to me to know that you can't just Google my home address. And so I think it's worth its weight in gold. It takes 10, 15 minutes to sign up, give them your information, and it's worth it. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. Well, we're going to have to probably close the show, but I want to make sure that we share your information. So I did have your phone number there, but I'm going to take it off because, we don't need anything like that either. So I'm just going to add it here. So here we go. So here is how they can get a hold of you at the law firm. So it's beermannlaw.com. That's BEERMANN law, LAW.com. And then, of course, you can just email him if you'd like at jsteele, that's JSTEELE at beermannlaw.com. So please get a hold of them. And you've shared a lot of information with us. I mean, it's tremendous what you have shared. And I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a wonderful show, and it's so important. I mean, we don't think about cybersecurity. We don't think about our security as much, and so I think it's very, very important. And of course, we all know, if you receive something, don't, as an attachment, don't download it, don't open it, don't do anything like that. If you don't know who it is, don't, I don't even answer the phone if I don't know who it is. They can leave me a message. If they can't leave me a message, then I, shouldn't be talking to them. So if it's a foreign number, someone number I don't recognize, even if it's the same area code. And I think you made that point. So I think that's a very good point to make, that a lot of people can get your area code and call you and you think, oh yeah, it's some lady local. Now, just if you don't know who it is, let them leave a message, call them back. I think it was a little bit safer that way. But any other words you'd like to leave with us before we have to close?
No, I think we did a good job of helping out. You sound like you're a step ahead of most people. You do a good job of protecting yourself. So I think you're helping out your listeners and your viewers. You're doing them a solid. So well, I appreciate the opportunity to come on your show. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. I tell you, it's just a delight to have you. And I don't know about that because I know I'm all over and I'm probably several pages deep when you go Googling, but whatever it is, it is. So, but I want to thank you so much for being on the show here tonight. Okay, we have Jonathan Steele Esq on with us, and he is with Beermann LLP. So please reach out to him. We hope that you do. Any questions that you might have, if you are you're in Illinois, so the Chicago area, if you're going through a divorce or something like that, he does family law. So reach out to him, and I'm sure he'd be happy to help you with that. So I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. You guys are listening to WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. That's our radio station. This is the TV News Streaming Network.com. I want to thank all of you Roku listeners that are listening to us here live. We do appreciate you very, very much. And all of those out there on social media and YouTube and all the other places that we stream. We want to thank you so much for listening to us. This is the Going Solo with Cece. I am Cece Shatz, and I'm so glad to be with you here tonight. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.